toppling King Coal. What a title for a panel, right? So let's jump into it. Nicole, you're obviously at the Bezos Earth Fund, one of the big philanthropies, one of the biggest, I should say, but one that also has taken some innovative approaches. You keep your eyes open for market-based approaches, new ways of thinking about philanthropy. What do you think on this very thorny problem? Again, this audience is deeply enmeshed in both sustainability issues, but also this question of the transition. So we don't have to rehearse sort of first principles.
Yeah.
Let's get into solutions here. What are you working on, either in your philanthropy or with the groups you work with, that could come up with maybe new business models to try to phase out coal, which really is the carbon-intensive elephant in the room when we talk about climate? This is one of the big challenges, is remaining coal and trying to accelerate in a thoughtful way the retirement of coal plants. What do you have in mind?
Yes, certainly. And thank you very much for having me and Bezos Earth Fund here today. When we talk about energy transition, it's more than just the fuel. We obviously want that fuel to be greener and cleaner. But from our perspective, particularly from a philanthropy, we really are looking at the longer game as well, meaning what kind of energy system do we want, but also how do we make this more a just transition? So it's a real balancing act. We all want to go cleaner, but we also need to manage that energy security issue, including the socioeconomics and the job creation issue. And so it really is looking at it as a transition. It's not just turning the lights off today that are coal or gas and turning them green tomorrow. We really need to think a little bit more forward planning to really measure that. I mean, when you look at Africa as a region, 30% of electricity is still coal, and particularly here in South Africa, over 80% of your electricity still today is run by coal. But that is part of the transition, and we've seen those plans come out. And basically what we do, particularly from a philanthropy lens, we want to accept a little bit of high risk, work with partners, private and government, as to how we can provide some solutions. So we invested very early on in South Africa. Before the JETP was announced by South Africa, Komati was released to be decommissioned. And then obviously it's become a highlight of the South Africa JETP plan. And so we worked with one of our partners, GEAP, Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, and basically provided funding focused on South Africa for multiple aspects. One was government capacity, about how do you transition from a coal to a green economy. And the other one was actually looking at Komati, not just transferring fossil fuel workers, but the local community. What could we contribute to give them a future for the future of South Africa and also in the energy industry here? So we set up a renewable centre, focusing particularly on solar, wind and battery training. It's been up and running just short of 2 years at the end of this year. And at the end of this year, we would have trained about 512 people. Now, this is just a start. But what was really important there was not just thinking about how do some of these fossil fuel workers transition to a new green economy. It was also thinking about that wider community. A lot of these coal plants are at the core of communities. They're a core of economic means. And so we've got to think also not just the plant employees, but the wider community as well. And so we're very proud here as a partner of GEAP, also exploring the lessons learnt. And I think, it goes without surprise, the more you can forward plan is better in these things, but it's also about collaboration and partnership. Working with sort of the asset managers, it's also the local community, private and government, but really thinking a bit more creatively about those new business models of how do you to transition from a coal economy to a green economy.
So Nicole, you finally got to it. It took you a while to get to the business models that I asked you about, but I'm glad you took this journey, because I took the journey to Komati myself on Tuesday. I saw the Renewable Energy Center you talked about. I met with the workers, some of them, including a new batch that was coming in, 15 that was being trained. And we had, of course, the CEO of Eskom on our stage yesterday. He has publicly said the Komati effort has been a failure, has let down the team. And what I saw and what I spoke to the ward councillor and others, they're disappointed with the way things have gone. So regardless of the well-intentioned approaches, and you've already gotten to the point about talking about lessons learned, planning earlier, thinking more about the wider community. If we can really press on that, because I think this is where we want the conversation to go to. There are plenty more coal plants here in South Africa and at 6,000 plus around the world. What should we learn to do differently and better, particularly on the innovation front? If you can give us an answer, then I'm going to come to my fellow panelists to jump in on that point as well.
Sure. And at the core of that is actually what I've already said too, in the sense that everyone needs to recognise Komati was decommissioned before all the jet fuel was announced.
It's misrepresented sometimes
so
as part of jet
fuel. It's misrepresented both
Correct.
locally and in the international news, and that's a clear fact. But the thing is this forward planning. So Komati had already fully decommissioned.
Right.
And then through us and GIAP, we said, well, what can we do with this local community?
Right.
How do we support them in this transition? And so the renewable training's only been up and running, well, at the end of this year, it's just 2 years.
Right.
And so it's in that forward planning, we've got to think a little bit more clever, and that's anyone sort of transferring from fossil fuel to a green economy in terms of how do you transition not just the assets, but your employees and that economy to that new
But what I've heard from you is train them in renewables. That's one thing. And hopefully other things too, because we all know renewables don't create as many jobs long term beyond the construction phase as do traditional industrial facilities, right? So I presume we need other things too.
True. And look, from my lens, I mean, we are focused on climate, so we're only looking from a green, renewable lens. But you know, you are correct. But it's a partnership and it's about coordination. It's also not just providing those skills, but private sector and government have got to create those opportunities and those infrastructure opportunities through the strict regulations, through the open RFPs, and sort of stick to their planning too to make those opportunities come to life.
Right. I'm glad you hit on the role of government as well. Chris, let's turn to you. You direct Africa and Asia for Carbon Trust. So you have a visibility across not just here, of course, an important lead country, South Africa, but the big coal giants, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, China, really, the lion's share of world's coal yet to be burned and likely to be burned is in Asia, and you have some boots on the ground there. Tell us what you think about this transformation. What should we be doing, and what are you working on? What are you cooking up?
Sure, thanks, Vijay. So at the Carbon Trust, one of the programs that we run is called the Coal Asset Transition Accelerator. So trying to identify coal plants that are basically ripe for some kind of transition that's going to shorten their lifetime, their life plans, and begin to reduce emissions. There are about 6,500 coal plants currently operational around the world, and they've all got a wide variety of different characteristics to do with their age, their size, their role in the grid, the enabling environment, and their ownership. And you've got to begin to break them down into different categories to think about what's the right intervention. So for some of the older plants, you've got to really think about what role can government play to introduce regulation to force them off, thinking about the air quality, carbon pricing. On some of the middle-aged plants between, say, 10, 25 years, you've got to look at some of the refinancing opportunities. How can you use innovative blended finance to begin to create value by looking at the retirement of those assets and bundling that with renewable energy in the local sites? But the real issue in Asia, in particular, you mentioned earlier, is these young plants that have only been built in the last decade or so.
Especially in Southeast Asia, there are a lot of younger plants.
Exactly. And so
the owners have a lot of dollarized debt and so on, makes it very hard to get them off of that.
And so for those, you've got to think about, well, how do you begin to use that existing infrastructure and think about the new business models that could include repowering them in different ways. So that could include looking at ways to maintain a lot of the infrastructure to prevent additional capital costs. And think about changing removing the coal firing part of the plant, but looking at alternative technologies. That could be solar and batteries locally. It could be looking at small modular nuclear. It could be looking at some of the enhanced geothermal options too. So you need to think about some of those future technologies that can be implemented into the existing coal plant that maintain that existing site, utilize the connection to the grid and the transmissions lines, and create
the employment as well for that community, thinking about the social dimension.
And the other option is looking at how you begin to change the way those coal plants are actually used in the grid. You can actually begin to reform the way that a coal plant is used away from base load as you begin to integrate more renewable energy and begin to look at the way actually it can balance and provide more flexibility services.
Well, let's put a pin in that, because I know that China is doing some interesting things with how it's using coal plants at less than rated capacity. But before we get to that, on the point about those younger plants, we have seen some financing mechanisms, not just the JETP approach, which has been extended to Indonesia now, but the Asian Development Bank has worked with Prudential, and I think with maybe even your organization, to come up with some efforts at financing coal for earlier retirement. the feedback I'm hearing from the ground is that it hasn't gone very well so far. And I've even received the press releases from angry environmentalists saying, how dare you pay coal owners to burn coal? That's a terrible use of official resources. Of course, in effect, this is not how the government would put it, or I'm sure Chris, but you have to bribe people to shut down their coal plants sooner than they would, right? Or compensate owners in the political economy terms. You have to compensate the losers in any transition. But this is difficult to do. And the optics don't look great if additional resources go to people who are burning coal for the next 10 years, let's say, because they won't burn them 20 or 30 years hence. Yeah. So how are you going to thread that needle?
Yeah, well, it's a tough challenge that as you've outlined. The Carbon Trust, we have worked with the Asian Development Bank, helping them to look at the coal fleets in some of those large emerging markets across Southeast Asia, identify the assets that are particularly well placed for refinancing. But as you say, there's a lot of moral hazard involved in that transaction. One of the interesting models that's happened in the Philippines is actually there's been a private sector energy transition mechanism that's actually done a fully private deal with no concessional finance involved, where the ASEN they're committed to retire their coal plant that's 250 megawatts 15 years early, therefore saving over 50 megatons of carbon in the process. And the critical thing here is that the asset owner has committed to invest all the proceeds into renewable energy. So they clearly appreciate the value creation opportunity of beginning to shift from coal to clean. But that's not always the case in some of those larger markets where there's more state-owned ownership of the assets. And that's where the government leadership around the renewable energy policy and the wider grid infrastructure, and as Nicole was saying, the forward-thinking, proactive approach about the social economic impacts, they've got to be put in place well in advance to make sure that the transition can happen at the right scale and pace.
Right. Okay. So there's some progress, some interesting lessons from Asia to learn from. We'll dig into that as well a bit further. Ryan, coming to you. What do you see as, again, getting beyond the short-term issue of the community dislocation, right? There are clear effects that we can see. We talked about with Komati. We have the CBAM policy that Europe is implementing. So economies, whether it's here, incredibly carbon-intensive industry in South Africa, one of the highest levels in the world of carbon intensity, as we all know, given the reliance on coal, to export to developed countries increasingly, there will have to be some transition. What do you think are the smart ways to encourage that? Any ideas you want to put on the table?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think there's a carrot and a stick. The stick in this case is regulation, carbon taxes.
Which may be delayed here, by the way, right?
Yes.
In South Africa,
yes,
we'll
that's
see.
right. But I think what's more attractive is the carrot. And picking up what Nicole said, I think for this transition to take place, it has to make sense to people. There isn't a strong moral imperative in very poor places to make a climate-based transition. People in Mpumalanga are poor, they are looking for jobs, and the best way to make this transition take place is to make sure that those short-term costs that people face in losing jobs, communities being decimated and so on, that those short-term costs are dealt with. You asked the questions of what lessons have been learned. I mean, forward planning, I think, is really important. You think of what the Germans did in the Ruhr Valley in transforming the coal fields. I mean, the planning of that started in the 1960s and was only finished in the 1990s, and that was a very successful, just transition. But it takes time. I also think it's a mistake to think about what can be done at the site of the plant. We've got a huge ecosystem that is reliant on coal mining, coal transporting, coal processing, and the plant, and all of the supporting businesses that are in that value chain. So to try and to ask at a micro level, what can this company do to have a just transition, I think is the wrong question. This needs to be a national question about what to do with the coal fields, because coal plants are often together around coal mines. It needs a systemic approach. It needs big partnerships between government and business, and it needs deep community involvement to be just and transparent.
No, the suggestion has been that this will be paid for mostly by international resources.
Yeah.
That the countries I've mentioned, by and large, are developing economies. I mean, China obviously is much wealthier than most others, where most of the coal is. But leave China aside, that this is unfair to ask these countries which are growing with big populations that need energy as well as economic growth to pay for this transition off of coal faster than they would otherwise. But the resources from the rich world have been slow to come, inadequate, even with the help from philanthropy. Official resources are probably not going to be anywhere near enough. So how do we square the circle? And I'll throw this open to any of you. Where will the financial resources come to ensure this transition is accelerated from an emissions perspective, but also sufficiently thoughtful for the community to provide other forms of livelihood and economic activity? A quick answer from any of you who wants to jump in.
I think you'll see at COP this year much more pressure for more money to flow global north to global south. I think the moral recognition now that that's necessary is sort of unimpeachable. But I think the CEO of Eskom alluded to it, of the JETP program in South Africa, only 6% is grant funding. Okay, so these are basically commercial loans and some soft loans. If you're going to talk about transitioning a whole area from one economic activity to the other, there's going to be a long lead time, and you need a lot more grant funding. You need a lot more grant funding to support skills, which is not, you can't make money out of training people. You need project preparation budgets. You need to support SMEs. So I don't know where the money is going to come from. I mean, I think the African governments don't have the money, and I think the moral pressure on the global north to step up financing, if they're projects, I think the money will come.
Nicole, what do you think? You've got deep pockets. Can you solve this yourself?
So I do agree. I mean, there's less than 10% of the JETP that's even been dispersed. And when you look at that breakdown, there's so much little concessional there. So look, part of there's got to be more increased concessional, and obviously philanthropy through grant funding can contribute to that as well and collaborate. But we also need to think a bit more of those new business finance products too. I mean, repeating current finance expectations, finance models to today, we're not going to move the needle at the speed or scale it needs to. So whether it's local banking institutions, which South Africa has very strong local banks, or it is the international market, which obviously has a play here as well, here particularly in South Africa, they need to think a bit more creatively. I mean, there's a lot of discussions about the modernisation of MDBs and World Bank and that, but we've got to get beyond that discussion too. We've got to really start thinking what are those new products? And if you don't mind me saying, I call it the future of the new partnership. We talk a lot about collaboration and partnership in the industry, but really it's not just coming together and bringing everyone's best 10 points. It's actually coming together and working your typical risk matrix of who's the best to manage what and how do you get that momentum to that speed and scale. So we need more leadership, both at the high level right down to, the working level of really what is the give and take we need to create those new finance products to get the money moving, but also the new business solutions on the ground.
Chris, I'll give you the last word on this. I understand that there is something of a bottom-up approach that Philippines is pioneering. Can you tell us a little bit about that example as a case study and maybe something to open our eyes, think of a different way forward?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the Philippines is a bit of a different market to start with. So when the Carbon Trust began to look at the different markets across Southeast Asia, the Philippines was a more attractive place due to the higher ownership of the coal plants by IPPs that are beginning to look at this as more of an opportunity. And so that allowed the ASEN, who's one of the larger sort of power generators in the region, to look at the opportunity to shorten their life plan of their plants through refinancing, and then also look at a deal with the Singapore government, the GIAP that Nicole has mentioned before, to look at the possibility for transition credits to begin to further shorten the lifespan of that asset. So there are people out there looking for new, smart, innovative ways.
The pool of money would come from Singapore, in effect, carbon credits in the compliance program, not a voluntary scheme, so high integrity program that would help fund that early retirement of coal in the Philippines.
Exactly.
So that's a very interesting transnational, but in a sense organic approach. It's not mandated from the World Bank or Cuba sitting in some dark room, but this is a really interesting thing bubbling up from the bottom. So I think we have a sense that there's dynamism in multiple directions. Yes, there are reasons to bang your head against the wall in this process. It is frustrating. There are not enough resources, but I would suggest that there's enough interesting thinking even at this panel, as well as around the world, working on this. So we should stay hopeful on this one. We're out of time, but I'm going to ask you to thank my panel for giving us their insights on this important topic. Thank you all very much.